let the night wrap around you. The night grows quiet, and history begins to speak in a softer voice. Somewhere between memory and dreams, the Tang Dynasty waits patiently to tell its story. Tonight, we drift gently into the everyday life of the Tang Dynasty from the year 618 to 907, not as grand emperors or heroic generals, but as ordinary people moving through calm days and unhurried nights. This was a long era, and most of the time it flowed steadily, like a wide river under a moonlit sky. Life during the Tang Dynasty was clearly divided between officials and common people, yet overall it was a prosperous age, full of routine, rhythm, and simple pleasures. Nothing rushed, nothing shouted. Even history itself seemed to walk instead of run. To understand this world, we begin slowly by standing at a quiet crossroads where silk roads stretch far away and city streets settle into evening rest. The Tang Dynasty governed a vast land, and its people lived within an orderly system that shaped how they dressed, worked, rested, and enjoyed themselves. While politics changed and courts rose and fell, daily life remained surprisingly steady. Most people woke with the sun, worked through predictable hours, and ended their days under oil lamps and fading conversation. This gentle repetition gave the era its calm strength. In this peaceful introduction, it helps to imagine the sounds of the time. Hooves echo softly on stone roads. Market sellers pack away their goods. Somewhere, a lute plays without urgency. The Tang world was confident enough to be relaxed, and relaxed enough to allow joy. Even when difficulties appeared, they arrived slowly, like clouds drifting rather than storms crashing. With this quiet setting in place, we can now move closer to the lives lived within it. Officials during the early and middle Tang Dynasty enjoyed stable and comfortable lives. Government service provided regular salaries, social respect, and predictable routines. Many officials lived in well-planned homes, wore fine robes, and followed carefully structured days filled with administration, writing, and polite gatherings. A well-known example is the poet Bai Juyi, who lived comfortably while writing about both personal life and social conditions. His career reflected a system that, at its best, rewarded education and steady service rather than constant ambition. As the dynasty moved toward its later years, the lives of officials became less secure. Although many still lived well, instability increased as the central government weakened. Corruption became more common, and some officials faced sudden changes in position or income. Natural disasters such as floods or poor harvests added further uncertainty. Even so, daily routines continued. Officials still attended court, wrote reports, and returned home in the evenings, perhaps with slightly heavier thoughts, but rarely with panic. For common people, life followed a simpler and more physical rhythm. Most wore clothing made of linen, practical and breathable, suited for work and long days outdoors. Hair was typically worn long, tied neatly rather than styled extravagantly. Homes were modest, but thoughtfully built, often featuring wooden lattice windows that allowed air and light to pass through. These houses were not luxurious, but they were functional and familiar, shaped by generations of quiet improvement. Money in the Tang Dynasty came in several forms. Copper coins with square holes were common and could be strung together for convenience. Gold and silver ingots were used for larger transactions, while silk sometimes functioned as both clothing and currency. This flexible system supported trade and daily exchange without much complication. People paid, traded, and moved on with their day. Leisure was an important part of Tang life. Entertainment was diverse and accessible, especially in cities. People enjoyed activities such as cockfighting, polo played on horseback, music, dance, and public festivals. These were moments of shared enjoyment, rather than dramatic spectacle. The culture of the Tang Dynasty was open and relaxed, allowing people to enjoy beauty and play without excess seriousness. Even officials participated, though usually with better seating and nicer refreshments. Trade connected the Tang Dynasty to distant lands. Merchants traveled along vast networks of roads and sea routes, including the famous Silk Road. Goods, stories, and customs moved steadily across regions. Travel was slow but reliable, and merchants accepted long journeys as part of life. Movement itself became routine, not adventure, and this familiarity softened the edges of distance. At the foundation of society were peasants, tenant farmers, and enslaved laborers. Despite land reforms intended to create fairness, inequality persisted. Many people worked land they did not own and lived under constant obligation. Their lives were physically demanding and economically limited. Literature from the period quietly reflects this hardship, not with anger, but with steady observation. These laborers formed the backbone of agricultural production. They planted, harvested, repaired irrigation, and maintained the food supply that sustained the empire. Though reforms existed in theory, dependence on landowners and elites remained strong. Life for these groups was repetitive and restrained, but also grounded in routine. Each season arrived as expected, and work followed its familiar pattern. In the end, the Tang Dynasty was not only a story of greatness, but of ordinary continuity. Officials filed documents, farmers tilled fields, merchants counted coins, entertainers played familiar songs. Society moved forward through habit more than drama. And perhaps that is why, centuries later, this era still feels calm enough to rest beside us, quietly, as sleep slowly arrives. As the night continues to settle, we can gently step closer to the everyday rhythm of the Tang Dynasty, not as hurried visitors, but as quiet observers strolling through time. This was an era that moved at its own steady pace, guided by routines rather than urgency. People woke with the sun, worked with the daylight, and rested when evening lamps flickered softly against wooden walls. Nothing rushed, and nothing needed to. In the Tang world, society was clearly layered, much like shelves in a well-organized library. Officials occupied the upper levels, while ordinary people lived closer to the ground, quite literally. Yet each layer followed a predictable pattern, which made life feel stable, even comforting. Officials attended court, managed documents, and occasionally worried about politics, though many preferred worrying about tea temperature or poetry lines instead. Their days were structured, calm on the surface, and sometimes quietly uncertain beneath. Meanwhile, common people focused on simpler, tangible things. Clothing made from linen brushed softly against the skin. Houses were modest but thoughtfully built, with wooden lattice windows allowing light and air to pass through like a slow, steady breath. Coins were strung together with care. Silk was folded neatly, and daily transactions happened without fuss. Life did not sparkle constantly, but it flowed. Entertainment existed too, not loud or overwhelming, but pleasantly grounding. Games, Festivals and sports added gentle color to ordinary days. Traders moved along familiar routes, connecting distant places without realizing they were stitching history together one calm journey at a time. In the fields, laborers worked patiently, season after season. Their lives were not easy, yet their presence formed the quiet backbone of the dynasty. Together, these routines created a world that, despite its inequalities, moved forward steadily, like a long exhale beneath a starlit sky. Chapter 1: The Overall Picture of Tang Dynasty Society. A calm beginning. Life under a long-lived dynasty. The Tang Dynasty, lasting from 618 to 907, stayed long enough for people to get used to it in the same way one gets used to an old wooden table in the house. It was always there. It did not rush. It did not leave suddenly. Generations were born, grew up, worked, rested, and quietly passed on, all under the same imperial roof. This long stretch of time created a sense of rhythm in society. Life moved at a steady pace. Seasons changed, crops were planted and harvested, markets opened and closed, and officials wrote reports that were sometimes read and sometimes politely ignored. Nothing felt overly dramatic on most days, and that was exactly how people preferred it. Tang society was clearly divided into groups, especially between officials and ordinary people. This division was visible in clothing, housing, daily routines, and even the way people walked through the streets. Officials tended to move more slowly, as if time itself was working for them. Farmers and craftsmen moved faster, guided by daylight and weather, rather than by court schedules. Despite this clear social structure, the Tang period is remembered as a generally prosperous era. The economy was strong, agriculture was productive, and trade routes connected cities, regions, and distant lands. Goods traveled calmly along rivers, roads, and sea routes. Silk, tea, ceramics, and stories all moved together, sometimes changing hands many times before coming to rest. Cities during the Tang Dynasty were lively but not chaotic. Markets had fixed hours, shops opened in an orderly manner. When evening arrived, people returned home, doors closed, and streets slowly became quiet. This balance between activity and rest gave Tang cities a steady heartbeat, one that could gently lull anyone into a peaceful state of mind. People worked, but not endlessly. They celebrated festivals, enjoyed performances, and gathered for simple entertainment. Life was not perfect, but it was predictable enough to feel safe. This predictability created a social atmosphere that felt open and relaxed compared to more turbulent eras before and after. Officials formed a distinct class within society. They were selected through examinations, educated in literature and administration, and assigned roles within the imperial system. Their lives were structured around documents, meetings, and official duties. In the early and middle Tang periods, many officials enjoyed stable incomes and respectable living conditions. Some officials, especially those of middle and higher rank, lived comfortably. Their homes were larger, their meals more varied, and their daily concerns more abstract than those of farmers. They worried about policy, promotions, and whether their calligraphy looked elegant enough. These concerns were serious but not urgent, in the way drought or hunger could be. Later in the Tang Dynasty, life for officials became less stable. Political struggles increased, corruption appeared more frequently, and natural disasters challenged the administration. Even so, officials generally maintained a higher standard of living than the general population. Their difficulties were real, but they were often discussed while sitting indoors, with tea nearby. Ordinary people made up the majority of the population. Farmers worked the land, craftsmen produced tools and goods, merchants traveled between markets, and laborers handled the physical tasks that kept society functioning. Their lives were shaped by routine and repetition, which created a quiet familiarity with the world around them. Clothing for common people was simple and practical. Linen fabrics were widely used, comfortable enough for daily labor and suitable for the climate. Hairstyles were straightforward and accessories were minimal. Homes were modest, but thoughtfully designed, often with wooden lattice windows that allowed light and air to enter without inviting too much dust. Money in the Tang Dynasty came in several forms. Copper coins with square holes were common and easily strung together. Silver and gold were used for larger transactions, while silk could also serve as a form of payment. This flexible monetary system helped trade flow smoothly without unnecessary tension. Entertainment existed in many forms, and it was not limited to the elite. People enjoyed games, animal contests, music, and public performances. Polo, known as a popular sport during the Tang period, was enjoyed by those who could afford horses, while simpler games entertained villagers and townspeople alike. Trade routes connected Tang China to distant regions. The Silk Road carried goods across land, while maritime routes linked ports to foreign markets. Merchants traveled steadily, guided by experience and routine. Their journeys were long, but they were not rushed, allowing stories and customs to travel as well. Beneath this generally calm surface existed groups with fewer privileges. Tenant farmers, laborers, and enslaved people formed the foundation of agricultural production. Despite land reforms intended to create balance, inequality remained. These people worked consistently, often without recognition, forming the quiet backbone of Tang society. Yet even here, life followed patterns rather than extremes. Work began at sunrise, paused at midday, and ended as daylight faded. Rest came naturally when the body needed it. The rhythm of labor mirrored the rhythm of nature, creating a steady flow that rarely demanded urgency. A society that breathes slowly. The Tang Dynasty did not demand constant attention from its people. It allowed them to live within its structure without feeling pressed at every moment. This quality made daily life feel spacious, even when conditions were modest. Time felt like something to move with, not something to chase. Social roles were well understood. Officials governed, farmers cultivated, craftsmen created, merchants exchanged, and laborers supported. Each role had its place, and while mobility was limited, the system itself provided clarity. People generally knew what was expected of them, which reduced uncertainty. The examination system offered one of the few paths for social advancement. Talented individuals from non-elite backgrounds could become officials through education and testing. This possibility added a quiet sense of hope to society, even if success required patience, effort, and a tolerance for long hours of study. Cultural life flourished in a gentle manner. Poetry, painting, music, and storytelling were present in both elite and popular spaces. These activities were not always grand performances. Often, they were simple moments shared among friends, neighbors, or family members after a day's work. Festivals punctuated the year, offering breaks from routine. Lanterns were lit, food was shared, and streets filled briefly with laughter and movement before settling back into calm. These moments did not disrupt life. they softened it. Transportation and travel expanded during the Tang period. Roads improved, canals were maintained, and ships traveled regularly. Movement was steady and purposeful, rather than hurried. Journeys took time, and that time was accepted as part of the process. Officials, especially in the capital and major cities, lived within structured schedules. Their days were filled with documents, audiences, and discussions. Even so, there was room for leisure, reflection, and personal interests. Some officials wrote poetry, others tended gardens, and many simply enjoyed quiet evenings. In the later Tang period, political instability increased. Regional powers gained influence and central authority weakened. These changes affected society gradually rather than suddenly. Life continued, adjusted, and carried on, much like a river that shifts its course without stopping its flow. Natural disasters, such as floods and poor harvests, tested the system. The state attempted responses, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. For ordinary people, resilience became part of daily life. They adapted, rebuilt, and continued working, guided by necessity rather than expectation. Despite inequalities, the Tang Dynasty provided a long period of relative continuity. This continuity allowed traditions to develop, routines to settle, and social habits to form. People lived within these patterns, without constant disruption. Humor existed quietly in daily life. Officials joked about paperwork. Farmers laughed at stubborn oxen. Merchants complained gently about road conditions. These small moments of humor softened the structure of society and made it more human. The presence of enslaved people and tenant laborers remained a serious reality. They carried heavy workloads and had limited autonomy. Their lives were harder, but even here, the pace of existence followed natural cycles rather than sudden shocks. As the Tang Dynasty moved toward its end, society showed signs of fatigue rather than collapse. Systems weakened slowly, confidence faded gently, life became less secure, but it did not lose its familiar rhythm overnight. In many ways, the Tang period can be imagined as a long, steady breath. It inhaled prosperity, exhaled culture, and rested between moments of effort. This breathing created space for people to live without constant tension. The social landscape of the Tang Dynasty was not perfect, but it was balanced enough to feel livable. It allowed work and rest, movement and stillness, authority and ordinary life to coexist. As night falls over Tang cities, lamps dim, streets quiet, and households settle into silence, the world slows naturally. History, for a moment, feels calm, predictable, and ready for sleep. Chapter 2. The Life of Officials in the Early and Middle Tang Dynasty. In the early and middle years of the Tang Dynasty, being an official was, generally speaking, a comfortable way to exist in the world. The dynasty was young, confident, and well organized, and the machinery of government ran with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Officials, especially those of middle and higher rank, lived lives that balanced responsibility with leisure, formality with personal cultivation, and duty with long, quiet evenings. Salaries were paid regularly, and although no one became fantastically rich from official wages alone, there was enough to maintain a respectable household. An official could afford proper clothing, servants, writing materials, tea, and the occasional indulgence in art or travel. Most importantly, he did not have to worry constantly about survival. This basic security allowed life to unfold at a calm and even pace. Daily work for a Tang official involved paperwork, audiences, inspections, and reports. There were laws to administer, taxes to record, and local matters to supervise. The work could be tedious, but it was rarely physically exhausting. Unlike farmers, officials did not rise before dawn to fight the soil, nor did they measure their days by weather and harvest. Their tools were brushes, inkstones, and patience. Education played a central role in this way of life. Officials were expected to be literate, cultured, and morally presentable. Many had passed the imperial examinations, which required years of study. As a result, reading and writing were not simply professional skills, but daily companions. After work, an official might read classical texts, revise an essay, or compose poetry in a quiet room while the lamps burned low. Poetry, in particular, flowed gently through official life. Writing verses was not seen as a dramatic act of genius, but as a natural extension of thought. A poem could be written after a meal, during a walk, or while waiting for an appointment. It was a way to settle the mind, to observe the passing world, and to place one's feelings neatly on paper where they could rest. Bai Juyi stands as a well-known example of this balanced existence. He served in government, fulfilled his duties, and still found time to write poetry that was clear, accessible, and quietly observant. His work suggests a life that was neither rushed nor indulgent, but gently attentive. He wrote about daily concerns, small frustrations, and ordinary pleasures, all without raising his voice. Housing for officials reflected their status but avoided excess. Homes were orderly with courtyards, wooden structures, and spaces designed for both work and rest. There was often a study room where books were stored and writing was done. Gardens, when present, were not grand statements but calm arrangements of plants, stones, and water, meant to be looked at slowly. Meals were simple but sufficient. Rice, vegetables, tea, and occasional meat formed the basis of daily dining. Eating was not hurried. It was another quiet ritual in a day made up of small, repeating actions. An official could eat, rest, work, and reflect without feeling pressed forward by time. In these years, the state was relatively stable, and this stability shaped personal lives. Officials expected continuity. They planned for the future, trusted the system, and settled into routines that felt dependable. Life moved forward like a steady river, wide and calm, carrying its passengers without sudden turns. Social relationships among officials followed similar patterns of measured calm. Colleagues interacted through formal etiquette, shared meals, exchanged poems, and occasionally visited one another's homes. Friendships formed not through dramatic gestures, but through years of shared service, familiar conversations, and mutual understanding of the demands of office life. Travel was also part of an official's experience. Assignments could require relocation to distant regions, sometimes far from the capital. These journeys were slow, taken by horse or boat, and filled with long stretches of quiet observation. Officials wrote poems about roads, rivers, inns, and landscapes, not to complain loudly, but to gently note the passing scenes. Travel was tiring, but it was also contemplative. Even when difficulties arose, they were often absorbed into the steady rhythm of life. Promotions came slowly, demotions quietly. An official might be reassigned to a lesser post, accept it with resignation, and continue his routines in a new place. Disappointment existed, but it was usually worn lightly, folded into the fabric of daily living rather than made into a public drama. The early and middle Tang periods benefited from strong central control and effective administration. This meant that officials could focus on their tasks without constant fear of political chaos. Corruption existed, as it does in all systems, but it had not yet reached the levels that would later trouble the dynasty. For now, order prevailed, and order is a very good companion for sleep. Clothing for officials followed regulations that marked rank clearly. Robes were neat, colors were assigned, and hats indicated position. Dressing each day was a simple, familiar process. There was no need for invention or surprise. One dressed, one worked, one returned home. The predictability was reassuring. Leisure time was quiet and personal. An official might play a musical instrument, though not too loudly. He might stroll through a garden, watch the seasons change, or sit with a cup of tea and do nothing at all. Doing nothing when life is stable becomes an art. It requires no effort and produces no noise. Family life unfolded alongside official duties. Marriage, children, household management, these were handled with the same calm attention as work. Evenings were often spent indoors, under lamplight, listening to small sounds, footsteps, wind, the settling of wood. The day ended not with excitement, but with rest. Looking back, the life of Tang officials in this period appears almost deliberately gentle. It was not perfect, and it was not equal, but it was steady. The system allowed a certain softness to enter daily existence. Time stretched, days repeated, minds wandered peacefully. And so, in the early and middle Tang Dynasty, officials lived lives shaped by routine, culture, and quiet confidence. They worked, they wrote, they rested. History moved forward, but at a walking pace. It is the kind of life that does not demand attention, only presence. And presence, held softly, is often enough to let sleep arrive on its own. Chapter 3. Officials in the late Tang Dynasty. Still comfortable, but less at ease. A gentle life with a quiet unease. In the later years of the Tang Dynasty, roughly from the mid-9th century onward, the lives of officials continued on a familiar path, yet the road beneath their feet no longer felt entirely solid. The empire still existed, the bureaucracy still functioned, and the daily routines of court life continued with a calm and practiced rhythm. Officials still woke up, dressed carefully, reviewed documents, attended meetings, and returned home in the evening. On the surface, very little seemed different, but beneath this steady routine, a soft and persistent sense of uncertainty slowly settled in, like a thin mist that never fully lifted. The Tang court, once energetic and confident, had grown tired. Decisions took longer, reports moved more slowly, orders traveled through layers of administration that felt heavier than before. Officials noticed this not with alarm, but with quiet resignation. Meetings were longer, outcomes less certain, and responsibilities more complicated. The empire had not stopped working. It had simply begun to sigh more often. Despite these changes, most officials still lived comfortably. Salaries continued to arrive, though sometimes late. Housing remained respectable. Food was available, and daily needs were met without constant worry. Compared to ordinary people, officials remained securely positioned. They did not fear hunger tomorrow, nor did they worry about losing shelter overnight. Their lives were still, by any reasonable measure, stable. Yet comfort no longer meant peace of mind. Corruption had become more visible, not shocking, just persistent. Some officials advanced not through ability, but through connections and quiet exchanges. Others remained in place despite diligence and talent. This created an atmosphere that was not angry, but faintly discouraging. It felt like walking on a well-known path that now contained small stones underfoot. Nothing painful, just slightly uncomfortable. Natural disasters added another layer of quiet concern. Floods, droughts, and failed harvests appeared more frequently in official reports. Earlier in the dynasty, the state responded with speed and confidence. In the later period, responses were slower and less effective. Officials read reports describing damaged fields and displaced families, knowing that solutions were limited. This awareness did not always bring panic, but it did bring fatigue. At home, officials maintained refined habits. Tea was still brewed carefully, poetry was still written, though often with softer tones and shorter lines. Gardens were tended, children educated, and social visits exchanged. Conversation at gatherings avoided heavy topics, focusing instead on landscapes, weather, and shared memories of better times. Laughter remained gentle, never loud. Many officials sensed that their positions were stable for now, but not guaranteed forever. They continued their work without drama, completing tasks one after another, like pages in a long and familiar book. The story was still being written, but the handwriting had grown faint. As the Tang Dynasty moved closer to its end, officials learned to live within a balance of security and quiet worry. They were not desperate, nor were they fully relaxed. Their lives unfolded at a steady pace, marked by routine rather than ambition. Promotions still happened, but they carried less excitement. Transfers to distant posts were accepted with calm obedience, even when travel felt longer and roads less safe than before. The central government remained the heart of official life, yet its authority no longer reached as smoothly into distant regions. Local military governors gained influence, and officials stationed away from the capital often found themselves navigating unclear boundaries of power. This required patience rather than courage. Most officials adapted by doing their work carefully, avoiding conflict, and maintaining a low profile. Daily work involved managing records, collecting taxes, organizing grain storage, and writing endless reports. These tasks were not heroic, but they were necessary. Officials understood that efficiency mattered, even if recognition was limited. Their satisfaction came not from praise, but from order itself. A completed document, a balanced account, a resolved dispute. Small victories that allowed the day to end quietly. At home, life remained modestly pleasant. Families gathered for meals, shared simple stories, and rested early. Evenings were calm. Lamps burned steadily. The outside world felt distant, softened by walls and habit. Officials slept, knowing that tomorrow would resemble today, and that familiarity, though imperfect, had its own comfort. Social life continued in restrained forms. Gatherings were smaller, celebrations were quieter. People spoke with care, choosing words that neither praised too much nor criticized openly. Humor still existed, often gentle and understated. Jokes about paperwork, about aging horses, about the endless cycle of reports and seals. Nothing sharp, nothing loud. Officials were aware of the growing gap between their own lives and those of ordinary people. They knew that farmers struggled more, that taxes felt heavier, and that disasters affected villages more harshly than offices. This awareness did not always lead to action, but it shaped a subdued tone in official writing and private reflection. Sympathy existed, even if solutions were few. In this later Tang world, being an official meant continuing forward without clear expectations. It meant accepting comfort without confidence, routine without assurance, and responsibility without certainty. It was a life that required patience more than ambition, endurance more than brilliance, and so the officials of the late Tang Dynasty lived on, not dramatically, not tragically, but quietly. They worked, rested, worried a little, and carried on. History remembers their era as one of decline, but for those within it, daily life flowed gently, one calm day after another, like a river that still moves, even as it approaches the sea. Chapter 4: Clothing, Housing, and Daily Life of Ordinary People in the Tang Dynasty. Life for ordinary people during the Tang Dynasty unfolded in a calm, practical rhythm, much like a long walk taken without any particular hurry. These were people who woke with the daylight, worked with their hands, and rested when the sky slowly dimmed. Their lives were not filled with dramatic turns, and that is precisely what made them steady and quietly enduring. Clothing was simple, sensible, and designed for real life rather than admiration. Most ordinary people wore garments made from linen or hemp fabric. These materials were breathable, durable, and forgiving after long days of work. Linen did not mind dust, mud, or sweat, and it certainly did not complain when washed often. The colors were usually soft and muted, leaning toward natural tones like pale brown, gray, light blue, or off-white. Bright colors existed, of course, but they were not common in everyday wear for farmers or laborers. Clothing was meant to be worn, not admired from a distance. Men and women alike usually kept their hair long, tied, or wrapped neatly to keep it out of the way. Hairstyles were practical rather than decorative. A neat knot or simple binding was enough to signal that someone was ready for the day. Hair was washed, combed, and cared for, but rarely styled for fashion alone. After all, hair that stayed in place made working in the fields or workshops much easier, and practicality was a quiet virtue of the time. Footwear was equally modest. Straw sandals were common, light on the feet, and easy to replace when worn out. Shoes were not designed to last a lifetime. They were designed to last until the next pair could be made. This was not seen as a problem. It was simply how life worked. When something wore out, it was replaced calmly and without complaint. Housing for ordinary people followed the same gentle philosophy. Most lived in wooden houses built with straightforward designs. These homes were not large, but they were carefully constructed to offer shelter, warmth, and a sense of belonging. Wooden beams supported tiled or thatched roofs, and walls were designed to protect against wind and rain. Windows were often fitted with simple wooden lattice frames, sometimes covered with paper or thin fabric to soften the light entering the room. Inside, the house was quiet and uncluttered. Furniture was minimal: a low table, simple stools, sleeping mats, storage chests. There was space to sit, space to rest, and space to think. Every object had a purpose. Nothing existed simply to fill space. When night came, mats were laid out for sleeping, and when morning arrived, they were rolled away again. The house adapted to the rhythm of the day, just as its inhabitants did. Daily life moved slowly but steadily. People cooked simple meals using basic ingredients, grains, vegetables, and whatever seasonal foods were available. Cooking fires burned quietly, producing warmth and food without much drama. Meals were not rushed. Eating was a moment of rest, a pause in the day, a small reward for steady effort. Conversations were light, often about weather, harvests, or small neighborhood news. Tools and household items were few but reliable. Clay pots, wooden utensils, woven baskets, all built to last. When something broke, it was repaired if possible. Waste was not fashionable, and replacement required effort. Objects were treated with care because they were part of daily survival, not disposable conveniences. Life, overall, was calm and predictable. People did not expect constant change or excitement. They expected the seasons to turn, the work to continue, and rest to arrive when it was time. There was comfort in this predictability, a quiet reassurance that tomorrow would resemble today in familiar ways. Beyond the walls of their homes, ordinary people spent much of their time engaged in steady labor, farming, crafting, carrying goods, and assisting in local markets filled their days. The pace was not frantic. It followed the rhythm of nature rather than clocks. When the sun rose, work began. When it set, work gently ended. There was little pressure to hurry beyond what daylight allowed. Markets were lively but not overwhelming. They served as gathering places where people exchanged goods, news, and brief moments of social connection. Vendors displayed vegetables, grains, cloth, and simple tools. Bargaining happened quietly, without tension. Everyone understood the value of things, and most understood the value of patience as well. No one expected miracles from a market visit, just what was needed for the next few days. Social life among ordinary people was modest and familiar. Neighbors knew one another. Help was given when needed, not always formally, but naturally. If someone was sick, others helped with food or labor. If a house needed repair, hands appeared without ceremony. These acts were not heroic, they were normal. Community life was built on quiet cooperation rather than grand gestures. Entertainment existed, but it was woven gently into daily life. After work, people might gather to talk, share simple stories, or watch local performances during festivals. There was laughter, but not excess. Joy appeared in small, comfortable forms. A good harvest, a shared meal, or a pleasant evening breeze was enough to make a day feel complete. Despite the simplicity, life was not without hardship. Weather could be unforgiving, and illness or poor harvests could disrupt stability. Yet even these difficulties were met with a kind of acceptance. Complaints were soft, not loud. People adapted because adaptation was necessary. Worry existed, but it did not dominate every thought. The slow pace of life allowed space for reflection, even if people did not label it as such. Sitting quietly after a long day, watching shadows stretch across the ground, listening to distant sounds, these moments offered rest to both body and mind. Sleep came naturally, without struggle. Exhaustion was honest, earned through real effort. In this way, the daily life of ordinary people during the Tang Dynasty formed a steady background to the grander stories of emperors and officials. While history often focuses on power and policy, most lives unfolded gently, without spectacle. These people lived, worked, rested, and slept, day after day, forming the quiet foundation of a long-lasting civilization. Their world was not loud, not fast, and not restless. It was steady, grounded, and deeply human. And in its own soft way, it was complete. Chapter 5. Money, and everyday transactions in Tang Dynasty. Life. The quiet presence of money in daily life. Money in the Tang Dynasty did not shout. It did not rush. It mostly stayed quietly in pockets, sleeves, small cloth bags, and sometimes tied together with a thin string, waiting patiently for its turn to be useful. During the Tang Dynasty from 618 to 907, money existed not as a source of constant excitement, but as a calm companion in everyday life. People did not wake up thinking about wealth in dramatic ways. They woke up thinking about breakfast, the weather, work, and whether the road to the market would be muddy or dry. Money followed along quietly. The most common form of currency was the copper coin, round in shape with a square hole in the center. This hole was not decoration. It allowed coins to be strung together, sometimes by the dozens or hundreds. A bundle of coins could hang from a belt or be carried over the shoulder. It was practical, slightly heavy, and very honest about its weight. No one forgot they were carrying money. Their posture reminded them. These copper coins were used for most daily transactions. Buying vegetables, paying for oil, exchanging grain, or settling small services usually involved these coins. Counting them took time, which meant transactions rarely felt rushed. People counted carefully, slowly, sometimes twice, and often with a calm acceptance that time was passing anyway. For larger transactions, silver and gold were used. These metals were not shaped into decorative coins for daily use, but rather into ingots or small bars. They were heavier, more serious, and appeared mostly in the hands of merchants, officials, or wealthy households. Gold and silver did not circulate quickly. They rested waiting for moments that truly required them. Silk also functioned as a form of currency. This may sound unusual to modern ears, but in Tang society, silk had stable value. It was beautiful, useful, and widely desired. Using silk in exchange did not feel strange. It felt natural, like offering something both practical and refined at the same time. Because of this variety of money forms, trade in the Tang Dynasty felt flexible. There was no single way to pay, and no urgent pressure to standardize every transaction. People adapted based on context. Small needs used copper, bigger matters used silver. Important exchanges might involve silk. Life adjusted itself without much complaint. There was also a sense of trust built into these systems. People recognized the value of what they were holding. They did not rush to outsmart each other. Bargaining existed, but it was often gentle, sometimes even friendly. A slight smile, a sigh, a shared understanding that everyone was trying to get through the day. Markets were lively but not chaotic. Vendors sat calmly behind their goods. Customers walked slowly, touching, examining, thinking. Money changed hands at a pace that allowed breathing. Even disagreements were usually quiet. Voices rose rarely, and when they did, they tended to fall again quickly. In this environment, money did not dominate life. It supported it. It allowed movement, exchange, and stability, but it did not demand constant attention. People knew they needed it, but they did not worship it. They respected it, much like they respected time or weather. And perhaps that is why daily life during much of the Tang Dynasty felt steady. Money flowed, but it did not flood. It circulated, but it did not overwhelm. It existed gently alongside people who were already busy living. Some historians describe the Tang economy as sophisticated, and that is true. But it was also calm. The systems worked quietly in the background, allowing ordinary people to focus on ordinary things. And that quiet efficiency made daily life feel manageable, even predictable, which is something the human mind often appreciates deeply. If money could hum softly while sitting still, Tang Dynasty money would have done exactly that. Trade, rhythm, and the comfort of familiar exchange. Trade during the Tang Dynasty moved like a slow river. It flowed steadily, rarely overflowing, rarely drying up completely. Markets were everywhere. In cities, they were organized into specific areas, often regulated by time and location. In towns and villages, markets appeared more informally, adjusting to local needs. People knew when market days happened, and they prepared accordingly. There was comfort in this rhythm. Merchants did not rush. They traveled long distances, sometimes by land, sometimes by sea, carrying goods that had already survived weeks or months of movement. Silk, tea, ceramics, spices, and metals moved along trade routes that connected regions far beyond China's borders. The famous Silk Road was not just a line on a map, it was a living system of slow, careful exchange. Money made this system possible, but it did not speed it up unnaturally. Transactions happened when they happened. Delays were accepted. Weather was respected, roads were unpredictable, and everyone understood this, so patience became part of the economy. For ordinary people, trade was local. They bought what they needed, sold what they could spare, and rarely speculated beyond the next season. Money supported survival more than ambition. This kept expectations grounded and stress relatively low. The use of silk as currency added an interesting softness to trade. Silk was pleasant to touch, visually calming and culturally valued. Exchanging silk did not feel aggressive. It felt ceremonial, almost polite. Even disagreements over silk quality tended to be quieter than disputes over metal. Copper coins, with their familiar weight and shape, created a sense of continuity. A coin from one transaction might appear again days later in another hand. Money traveled small distances, living many small lives. This circulation created a shared experience. Everyone knew these coins. Everyone had held them. There was also regulation. The Tang government paid attention to currency stability. They minted coins, controlled standards, and monitored circulation. This helped prevent chaos. People trusted the money because it stayed consistent. A coin today would still be a coin tomorrow. Of course, problems existed. Inflation happened at times. Corruption affected distribution. Some regions struggled more than others. But these issues unfolded slowly. There were no sudden collapses in daily transactions for most people. Life adjusted quietly. For merchants traveling long distances, money was both a tool and a burden. Carrying silver or strings of coins was physically demanding. This naturally limited reckless movement. Trade remained thoughtful, planned, and cautious. Perhaps that is why long-distance commerce felt less frantic than modern trade. In everyday life, money rarely caused drama. It was present at meals, at markets, at small celebrations, and at quiet exchanges between neighbors. It did not interrupt conversations. It waited politely. People understood its role. Money was not the meaning of life, it was a method, a bridge between needs and resources, a practical solution to practical problems. At the end of the day, after transactions were done, coins were stored away. Silk was folded, silver was hidden carefully, and life returned to rest. Money slept too, in a sense, waiting for the next day. This calm relationship with money shaped the emotional tone of Tang society. It reduced urgency. It encouraged patience. It supported a rhythm of life that allowed people to breathe. And in that rhythm, trade became less about winning and more about continuing. Less about accumulation and more about balance. Money did its job and then stepped back. In the long evenings, as lamps dimmed and markets closed, the sounds of coins faded. What remained was quiet conversation, familiar routines, and the gentle sense that tomorrow would likely feel much like today. And for many people living in the Tang Dynasty, that was more than enough. Chapter 6: Entertainment, Culture, and Gentle Pleasures in the Tang Dynasty. Everyday joys that moved at a comfortable pace. In the Tang Dynasty, life was not only about work, harvests, official reports, or long journeys across dusty roads. There was also time set aside for enjoyment, and that enjoyment was often gentle, social, and pleasantly predictable. Entertainment during this period did not rush forward or demand too much attention. It flowed quietly, alongside daily life, like background music that one eventually stops noticing but still finds comforting. For ordinary people, entertainment was woven naturally into communal life. Villages and city neighborhoods had shared spaces where people gathered, talked, watched, and listened. These gatherings did not require grand planning. Sometimes they happened simply because the weather was good, the workday had ended, or someone nearby decided it was a good afternoon for a small event. In this way, leisure blended easily into routine. One popular pastime was cockfighting. It sounds intense when described briefly, but in reality it was often a calm, familiar activity, rather than a loud spectacle. People gathered around, chatted quietly, made small wagers, and watched with mild interest. The birds were well cared for, sometimes better than their owners' sandals. The activity provided conversation, mild excitement, and a reason to pause the day without disrupting it entirely. Another well-known form of entertainment was polo, or maqiu, a horseback game that became fashionable during the Tang era. Polo reflected the dynasty's openness to foreign influences, especially from Central Asia. While the sport itself was energetic, the way people engaged with it was balanced. Not everyone played. Many simply watched from the side, enjoying the movement of horses, the rhythm of the game, and the elegance of skilled riders. It was action observed at a distance, making it suitable even for those who preferred to sit quietly and sip tea. Music and performance were also central to Tang entertainment. Musicians played string instruments, flutes, and drums, often in small ensembles. Performances took place at markets, festivals, and sometimes in private homes. The music was expressive but not overwhelming, designed to accompany life rather than interrupt it. Listeners did not analyze each note. They let the sound pass through the air and settle naturally into the moment. Dance performances followed a similar pattern. Dancers moved gracefully, telling stories through motion rather than words. These performances were appreciated for their beauty and rhythm, not for shock or surprise. People watched, nodded, and then returned to their conversations, carrying the memory quietly, rather than loudly discussing it afterward. Festivals marked the passing of seasons and agricultural cycles. These were regular, expected events that people looked forward to calmly. Lantern festivals, seasonal celebrations, and market fairs offered food, games, music, and performances. The atmosphere was lively but rarely chaotic. There was laughter, but also plenty of space to stand back and simply observe. Children played, adults talked, elders watched, and everyone understood roughly how the day would unfold. What made Tang entertainment especially gentle was its predictability. People knew what to expect. There were no sudden surprises or dramatic changes. This consistency made leisure comforting rather than stimulating. It allowed the mind to rest, while the body remained lightly engaged. Even storytelling fit this pattern. Storytellers recited familiar tales of history, romance, or everyday life. Many listeners already knew the endings. That was part of the pleasure. Hearing a known story again, with small variations in tone or detail, created a sense of continuity. It reminded people that life moved forward steadily, not urgently. In cities like Chang'an and Luoyang, entertainment options were more numerous, but they remained orderly. Tea houses offered quiet conversation, light performances, and simple snacks. People came not to be amazed, but to pass time pleasantly. A visitor could sit for hours, listening half-heartedly, drifting between thoughts, and leaving without feeling that anything important had been missed. Humor existed too, but it was understated. Jokes were observational, often about daily inconveniences or familiar social habits. Nothing too sharp, nothing too emotional. Laughter rose gently and faded quickly, making room again for calm conversation. In this way, entertainment during the Tang Dynasty supported a balanced rhythm of life. It acknowledged the need for rest and enjoyment without demanding excess energy. It gave people permission to pause, observe, and smile quietly before returning to their routines. Cultural calm, social connection, and the art of not rushing. Beyond individual activities, entertainment in the Tang Dynasty served a broader cultural purpose. It created shared experiences that connected people without forcing closeness. Participation was flexible. One could be fully involved or merely present, and both were equally acceptable. This made leisure inclusive and emotionally light. Cultural openness was a defining feature of Tang society, and it showed clearly in entertainment. Foreign musicians, dancers, and performers were welcomed, especially in major cities. Their styles blended gradually into local traditions. This blending did not feel disruptive. Instead, it expanded the cultural landscape slowly, allowing people to adapt without pressure. New sounds became familiar over time, and familiarity brought comfort. Markets played an important role in cultural life. They were not just places of trade, but also centers of informal entertainment. Street performers, musicians, and storytellers added gentle energy to these spaces. Shoppers paused briefly, listened for a moment, then continued on their way. No one felt obligated to stay. Entertainment came to people instead of asking people to chase after it. Seasonal festivals provided structure to the year. They arrived on schedule just as expected and departed quietly. These events reminded people of time's steady passage. Lanterns were lit, food was shared, games were played, and then everything returned to normal. The festivals did not attempt to create lasting excitement. Their value lay in repetition and familiarity. Leisure also existed within the household. Families spent evenings talking, playing simple games, or listening to someone read or recite poetry. Poetry in the Tang Dynasty was not only for scholars, it circulated widely, memorized easily, and shared casually. Reciting a poem was less about intellectual achievement and more about mood. A poem could soften an evening much like a warm lamp. Gardens, both public and private, offered quiet enjoyment. People strolled slowly, observed plants, watched birds, and enjoyed the changing seasons. These activities required no skill, no preparation, and no evaluation. They were perfect examples of entertainment that asked nothing in return except attention. Even drinking tea or wine was approached calmly. Social drinking was moderate, often paired with conversation or poetry. The goal was not excess but relaxation. Cups were small, refilled slowly, and enjoyed without urgency. A person could stop at any time without explanation. The Tang approach to entertainment reflected an understanding that joy does not need to be loud to be meaningful. Gentle pleasures were respected. Taking time to enjoy something simple was not considered laziness but part of a well-lived life. This attitude extended across social classes. While elites had access to larger events and private performances, the core experience remained similar. Everyone participated in leisure that fit naturally into daily life. The difference was scale, not spirit. As the day ended, entertainment faded naturally. There was no sense of loss or disappointment. People returned home, rested, and prepared for the next day. Leisure did not leave behind restlessness. It left behind calm. In this way, entertainment and culture during the Tang Dynasty supported emotional balance. They offered connection without obligation, enjoyment without excess, and rhythm without pressure. Life moved forward gently, with moments of pleasure appearing quietly along the way. And perhaps that is why these activities feel soothing, even when described centuries later. They remind us that a society once understood how to enjoy itself without rushing, how to laugh softly, and how to let the day end peacefully, ready for sleep, just like now. Chapter 7: Movement and Trade. Across a wide and steady world. Roads that did not rush. In the Tang Dynasty, movement was not something people hurried through. Travel existed, trade existed, long journeys certainly existed, but speed was not the goal. The goal was arrival, preferably without losing too many shoes, camels, or patience along the way. Merchants of the Tang period lived in a world quietly connected by roads, rivers, and sea routes. These paths stretched far beyond the cities and villages, linking China to Central Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, and even distant lands that most people only knew by name. This network was wide, steady, and surprisingly calm, considering how far it reached. The most famous of these routes was the Silk Road. Despite the dramatic name, it was not a single road, and it was not always about silk. It was a collection of land routes, winding gently through deserts, mountains, and grasslands, connecting Chang'an to places that felt very far away, but slowly became familiar through trade. Merchants traveling these roads did not rush. They moved with caravans, walking beside camels that appeared permanently unimpressed by human ambition. Days passed with the sound of footsteps, wind, and the occasional complaint about sand. Nights were quiet, spent resting, eating simple meals, and sleeping under wide skies that made people feel small in a comforting way. Trade goods moved slowly but steadily. Silk, tea, ceramics, paper, and metal goods traveled outward. In return came spices, precious stones, glassware, horses, and ideas. No one expected instant results. A successful journey could take months or even years, and that was considered normal, not stressful. Maritime routes also played an important role during the Tang Dynasty. Ports along the southern coast connected China to Southeast Asia, India, and beyond. Ships carried goods across calm seas when weather allowed, and waited patiently when it did not. Sailors understood the rhythm of the ocean and respected its preference for slow conversations. These sea routes brought a quiet variety into Tang society. Foreign merchants arrived with unfamiliar clothing, accents, and habits. They settled in port cities, opened shops, shared food, and learned how to wait politely in long lines like everyone else. The Tang government generally welcomed this movement as long as it remained orderly and predictable. For most ordinary people, travel was limited. Farmers stayed close to their land. Artisans worked where their tools were. But even they felt the presence of distant places through goods that arrived at markets, stories told by travelers, and rumors that sounded exciting but also slightly tiring. Movement during the Tang Dynasty was not about escaping life. It was about extending it gently. Goods traveled far so people did not have to. Stories traveled faster than people, and imagination traveled fastest of all. The pace of this world was slow enough to breathe. Journeys unfolded like long sentences without punctuation. No one checked the time constantly, because there was little point. The road would be there tomorrow, doing exactly what it did today. In this way, Tang-era movement created a sense of quiet continuity. Trade connected regions, cultures, and lives, but it did so without urgency. Everything arrived when it arrived, and that was considered sufficient. And so the roads remained open, the ships kept sailing, and the camels continued walking, carrying not only goods, but the soft assurance that the world was large, connected, and in no particular hurry. The gentle rhythm of distance. Trade during the Tang Dynasty followed a rhythm that felt almost musical. Not fast, not slow, but steady enough to let people breathe between notes. Merchants learned to listen to this rhythm because fighting it only led to exhaustion and lost sandals. A journey was never just about distance. It was about preparation. Before leaving, merchants spent weeks gathering goods, arranging animals, securing documents, and making peace with the idea that home would feel very far away for a long time. This acceptance was essential. Without it, the road felt longer. Caravans formed naturally. People traveled together for safety, companionship, and shared silence. Conversations were unhurried, often repeating the same topics over many days. Food, weather, prices, and whether this trip felt longer than the last one. The answers rarely changed, but that was part of the comfort. At stops along the route, small towns and trading posts provided rest. These places existed because of movement, and they respected its pace. No one hurried travelers. Tea was served slowly. Animals were fed first. Sleep came easily after long days of walking and gentle thinking. In port cities, trade followed a similar rhythm. Ships arrived when winds allowed. Goods were unloaded carefully. Markets opened with familiar sounds and closed before darkness felt inconvenient. Foreign traders adjusted to local customs while locals adjusted to new faces without much fuss. These exchanges shaped Tang society quietly. New foods appeared, new materials entered daily life, and new ideas drifted into conversations. Nothing arrived suddenly enough to cause panic. Change happened the way sleep arrives, gradually, then all at once, without anyone noticing the exact moment. Movement also influenced how people understood time. Distance encouraged patience. Waiting became normal, even respected. A delayed shipment was inconvenient, not catastrophic. A long journey was expected to be long. This mindset softened daily life. People planned loosely. They accepted uncertainty with a shrug and a cup of tea. If something did not arrive today, it would probably arrive tomorrow or next month. Either way, life continued. Even government administration adapted to this pace. Messages traveled by horse or boat, taking days or weeks to arrive. Decisions unfolded slowly, allowing problems to cool before being addressed. While not always efficient, this slowness prevented constant urgency from becoming the norm. For listeners drifting towards sleep, this world feels familiar in a comforting way. It reminds us that speed is not required for connection, that distance does not equal separation, that movement can exist without pressure. The Tang Dynasty's trade networks were wide but gentle. They connected continents without overwhelming the people who lived along them. They allowed cultures to meet without demanding immediate understanding. They let time stretch naturally, like a long evening that never feels wasted. As merchants returned home after months or years away, they brought stories rather than excitement. They spoke calmly about faraway places, unusual customs, and long roads. Their voices carried the quiet confidence of people who had moved through the world and returned without rushing it. And so, in the Tang Dynasty, movement became a background melody, always present, rarely loud, never hurried. A steady hum beneath daily life, reminding everyone that the world was large, connected, and willing to wait. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it now. Footsteps on packed earth, the creak of a wooden ship, the soft clink of goods being exchanged without urgency. And as those sounds fade, they carry you gently toward rest, leaving behind the calm assurance that nothing important needs to arrive tonight. Chapter 8: Peasants and Slaves. The quiet backbone of Tang society. Lives close to the soil. In the long and steady rhythm of the Tang Dynasty from 618 to 907, there were many kinds of lives unfolding at once. Some lives were written into official records, poems, and polished histories. Others were lived quietly, day after day, close to the earth, close to the seasons, and often far from the attention of the court. These were the lives of peasants, tenant farmers, and slaves who formed the silent foundation of Tang society. Despite land reforms introduced earlier in the dynasty, including systems meant to distribute land more fairly, inequality never truly disappeared. Over time, large estates grew, powerful families accumulated land, and many ordinary people found themselves working fields they did not own. Life for these laborers was simple in structure, repetitive in motion, and slow in change. A peasant's day usually began before sunrise. There was no bell, no announcement, just the soft understanding that daylight meant work. Fields needed tending, irrigation channels needed checking, tools needed mending. The work followed the seasons closely. Spring brought planting, summer brought careful maintenance, autumn brought harvest, and winter brought rest that was never quite complete. Even winter had its tasks, though they were quieter and slower. Food was modest and practical. Grains such as millet and wheat formed the core of daily meals. Vegetables were grown nearby, preserved when possible, and eaten without much ceremony. Meat was rare and usually saved for special occasions. Eating was less about pleasure and more about sustaining the body for another day of labor. Still, meals were shared, and that alone brought a quiet sense of comfort. Clothing for peasants was made from coarse fabrics, often hemp or simple linen. It was designed for durability rather than beauty. Clothes were patched, repaired, and reused until there was little fabric left to save. Fashion trends from the capital moved slowly, if they arrived at all. For most rural workers, practicality was the only style that mattered. Slaves, whose status placed them even lower in the social structure, lived under stricter conditions. They were legally bound to households or estates and had little control over their own time. Their labor supported agriculture, household work, and sometimes crafts. Life for them was shaped by obedience and routine. Change came slowly, if it came at all. Yet even in these constrained lives, there was a steady human rhythm. People talked while working, shared brief jokes, and rested together when the sun allowed it. The pace of life left little room for drama. Instead, it created a kind of quiet endurance, a calm acceptance shaped by repetition. The Tang state depended deeply on this labor. Grain taxes, corvée labor, and agricultural production all rested on the shoulders of peasants and bound workers. Without them, cities could not grow, armies could not march, and markets could not function. Their contribution was constant, even if their names were rarely recorded. This kind of life did not change quickly. Years passed in similar patterns, marked not by political events but by harvests and weather. In this slow passage of time, there was a strange stability. It was not an easy life, but it was a familiar one, shaped by routines that rarely surprised anyone. And perhaps that predictability, heavy as it was, carried its own quiet stillness, one that feels distant yet steady, like breathing alongside the land itself. Quiet endurance and lasting echoes. As the Tang Dynasty progressed, especially into its later centuries, the conditions of peasants and slaves remained largely unchanged. While the court faced political struggles, rebellions, and declining authority, rural life continued with the same steady persistence. Fields still needed planting, crops still needed harvesting. Labor continued regardless of events far away. Natural disasters such as floods and droughts affected peasants most directly. When harvests failed, hardship followed quickly. Relief from the state existed in theory, but in practice it was often delayed or insufficient. For many rural workers, survival depended on community cooperation and shared resilience rather than official aid. Despite this, large-scale rebellion was not a daily reality. Most people focused on endurance rather than resistance. Life encouraged patience. When work fills every hour, there is little energy left for dramatic change. Instead, people adapted quietly, adjusting routines, sharing burdens, and continuing forward. Literature from the Tang period offers brief but meaningful glimpses into these lives. Poets sometimes wrote about poor farmers, abandoned fields, or the fatigue of labor. These moments were often understated, reflecting observation rather than outrage. The tone was calm, almost gentle, as if acknowledging suffering without raising the voice. This subtle representation mirrors the nature of peasant life itself. There was hardship, but also familiarity. Days followed nights, seasons followed seasons. Life was not defined by sudden shifts, but by steady motion. This rhythm shaped how people understood time, not as something to race through, but as something to move with. Slaves, too, lived within this quiet framework. Their status limited freedom, but their daily routines were similarly grounded in repetition. Tasks were known, expectations clear. While this did not erase hardship, it reduced uncertainty. In a strange way, predictability became a form of stability. As land ownership grew more concentrated toward the end of the dynasty, dependence deepened. Many peasants lost what little independence they once had. Yet even then, daily life remained familiar. Fields looked the same. Tools worked the same way. The earth still responded to care and effort. From a distance, these lives may seem heavy, but when observed closely, they reveal a calm persistence. People did not live in constant despair. They lived in continuity. Small moments, resting under a tree, sharing food, watching the sky before rain, formed the quiet texture of existence. In the broader story of the Tang Dynasty, peasants and slaves were not central characters, yet they were always present. Their labor supported prosperity, their endurance absorbed hardship, and their routines maintained balance. They were the steady ground beneath a changing world. When the Tang Dynasty eventually came to an end, these lives did not vanish. The structures changed, rulers changed, but the rhythm of rural labor continued into the next era. Fields were still planted, harvests still gathered. Life moved forward, softly. And in that softness, there is something deeply calming. A reminder that history is not only shaped by emperors and officials, but also by countless quiet lives moving at an unhurried pace, steady, enduring, and gently persistent, like the slow breath of the land itself. A gentle farewell to the Tang Dynasty, quietly drifting into history. As the long day slowly folds itself into evening, the Tang Dynasty also settles quietly into rest. After centuries of movement, paperwork, farming, trading, poetry, and the occasional polite complaint about taxes, history places its brush down and exhales. The lamps dim, the city gates close. Somewhere a rooster considers waking up early tomorrow, then decides it can wait. In this gentle moment, the Tang world does not rush to impress anyone. Officials loosen their stiff sleeves, thankful that today no urgent memorials remain unanswered. Farmers stretch their tired backs, content that the fields will still be there in the morning, behaving much the same as they did yesterday. Merchants count their strings of coins slowly, not because they must, but because counting calmly feels right at this hour. Even the horses, once so proud on the polo field, stand quietly, chewing history one mouthful at a time. The Tang Dynasty, for all its grandeur, ends the day much like any other human story, by growing quieter. Palaces do not shout when the lights go out. Markets do not argue once the stalls are closed. Poems, written earlier with careful thought, rest peacefully on silk and paper, not demanding applause, only patience. History itself seems to whisper, "That will do for today." There is something deeply comforting about this rhythm. Life during the Tang era was not perfect, but it was steady enough to lull entire generations into routine. Wake up, work, eat, talk, travel, complain mildly, laugh when possible, sleep, repeat. A cycle so dependable that even centuries later it still feels familiar. If history had a rocking chair, the Tang Dynasty would sit in it, creaking gently, telling stories that never raise their voice. Officials may have worried about the empire's future, but not tonight. Tonight they place those worries neatly beside their inkstones. Farmers who carry the empire quietly on their shoulders rest without expecting applause. Merchants dream of roads stretching endlessly but never urgently. Nong-no and laborers sleep deeply, exhausted yet steady, knowing tomorrow will resemble today, closely enough to feel safe. There is a soft humor in how serious the Tang people were about living well but calmly. They built systems, wrote laws, organized markets, and composed poetry, all with the unspoken understanding that life should not feel like running downhill forever. Even their entertainment knew when to stop. The drums faded. The laughter softened. The night was allowed to be night. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the Tang Dynasty breathing. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow, steady rhythm, like someone who has lived long enough to know that excitement is temporary, but rest is essential. History does not demand that you remember every date or name right now. It simply invites you to lie down beside the past and let it keep watch for a while. And so, as this story gently closes its eyes, it leaves you with something simple, the reminder that even great empires needed sleep. Even powerful dynasties paused. Even history, vast and complicated, understood the value of stillness. The Tang Dynasty stretches once more, pulls the blanket of night a little higher, and smiles faintly at tomorrow, confident it can wait. Thank you for listening, for drifting, for allowing history to walk beside you so quietly. May your thoughts slow, your breathing soften, and your rest come easily from the calm streets of Chang'an to wherever you are now. This gentle voice of the past wishes you a peaceful night. Good night and sleep well.